tend to be led with colleagues from the Department for Infrastructure. So on that basis, they're really kind of going to be the principal policy leads in this area, albeit the building regulations might be used as the principal legislative mechanism. So today, we've two colleagues have very kindly agreed to lead sessions today, and that is Tim Weir and Eilish Ferguson from Department for Infrastructure, who are working quite intensively on this area. And I'll pass you over to Tim on that note, and that's all I have to say for today. We'll pass you on to Tim. Oh, one last thing, sorry. If you have questions or questions or that you wish to raise, we don't really have a chat function working, but we do have a question and answer box at the top, and you can lodge questions there. And should you have any queries of that, we'll certainly be following that up at the end if there's time, or we'll be able to come back to you if there isn't. If you have any trouble using that, you can always directly email us there, but I think the Q&A box seems to work quite well from our previous sessions. So on that, if you don't mind, I'll pass you over to Tim.
John, thanks very much. I'm Tim Weir, and I head up DFI's Transport Decarbonisation Unit, and we are the policy lead in the area of electric vehicles. And I thought it'd be useful to go through the first couple of slides here, just setting out a bit of the background and introduction on where we are at the minute on this. So first of all, the long-term vision for tackling the climate crisis here in Northern Ireland is set out by the Northern Ireland Executive's Green Growth Strategy, which is supported by its energy strategy. At UK level, the policy position is to end the sale of petrol and diesel cars and vans from 2035. And in response to this policy direction by the UK, the volume car manufacturers have taken us down the route of battery electric vehicles. And therefore that moves us in to how do we charge them. With more EVs being sold, there will be more demand for charging infrastructure. And our research shows that with 80% of properties in Northern Ireland having access to a driveway, the most economical and most popular method is likely to be home charging. You move on the slides there, Eilish. The next one, please. So our previous ministers of finance and infrastructure indicated that their preference was to bring forward the requirements for EV charging that are set out in the EPBD through amendments to building regulations. And this approach mirrors that being adopted throughout the rest of the UK and Ireland. What we've also recently been involved in is the introduction of what is known as the ZEV mandate, or zero emission vehicle mandate, which is a UK-wide piece of legislation that will come into force from the 1st of January 24. And what it does, it sets annual quotas at manufacturer level for the sale of new zero emission cars and vans. It starts at around 22% in 2024, moving up to 80% by 2030 for cars. And for vans, it starts at 10%, moving up to 70% by 2030 of all new sales. In terms of cars, that means by 2030, around 40,000 of all the new cars sold or registered in Northern Ireland will be zero emission vehicles, unlikely to be electric. So it is likely that the owners of these vehicles will expect to be able to charge them in their house, flat, or workplace. The mandate also has another purpose, as well as increasing the number of zero emission vehicles within the car fleet. The idea of having annual quotas sets a smooth transition to the uptake of these vehicles for our energy generators and our distribution network operators, so that they can better understand what is likely to be the demands on the grid moving forward. So that sets the background of where we are in terms of Northern Ireland around EVs moving forward. And then the proposal here is how do we help provide provision for people owning EVs moving forward. So Eilish, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through the rest of what we've put together.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Yeah, I'm Eilish Ferguson, and I work with Tim on transport decarbonisation, and have been looking at this EPBD over the course of the last number of months. If I just go through what we're proposing here. So as Tim and John were saying, it's proposed that we would use the building regulations to legislate for these requirements. This then goes along with the way that the Republic of Ireland and the GB administrations are implementing the EPBD. The England's legislation is quite a highly prescriptive approach, and we would anticipate proposing to take a more fundamental approach or functional approach. So really what we have here is what our proposals are, and if you've seen the consultation document, you'll understand that, and then the questions. So what I would like to highlight before I go even on any further is please respond back to the consultation document. So use that formal mechanism, because we would really appreciate your views on how you have seen this working or not working in the Republic of Ireland and GB, and what your views would be on how this would work in Northern Ireland, as things are obviously slightly different here. So to go on to the next proposal, you'll know that England has provided technical guidance under their Part S, infrastructure for charging electric vehicles, of its building regulations, and we will be providing a technical guidance document if these proposals go forward similarly to England's. But we also would be very grateful for your comments on how you feel this is working out in different jurisdictions. Going through this table here, I'm not going to read this to you because that would be extremely boring for you, but it's got the categories of buildings, and these are really the EPBD requirements, what the categories of buildings are, and then what the requirements are. So whether it's an installation of a charge point or ducting infrastructure, whether or not it might fall to building regulations. But also I really want to highlight that our proposals go further than these minimum requirements. And that really links in with how the GB administrations and the Republic of Ireland is looking at this, to not just go with the absolute bare minimum, recognizing that there is a massive shift with how the proposals are going forward with electric vehicles. So we want to make sure we are looking at catering to provide charging infrastructure for people to own electric vehicles. The next proposal is for new dwellings and dwellings undergoing major renovation. So it's really looking at charge points per dwelling or per for a associated parking space for that dwelling. It's not looking at going wider than that. The question really is do you agree with that? That's appropriate or not? For residential buildings with 11 or more parking spaces, that's looking at multi-residential buildings, apartment blocks, flats, and things. It's looking at cabling routes. We've called it ductwork. And you'll see that linking through this whole section as each area, whether it's a new dwelling or a non-residential building, looks at ductwork. We've also laid out what there are exemptions or limitations to each section. So in the requirements for new dwellings, it's provision of ductwork, but limiting to situations where the building might have 10 or more associated parking spaces. If it's applicable to major renovations as well, that links in here. But I really want to focus here just a brief moment on limitation 2, which looks at an OZEV guidance that has just come out for fire safety in covered car parks. The document, which is available online, is not a legal compliance document, but it does lay out what the expectation is for GB and with looking at the risks associated with charge points in covered car parks. And it links guidance along with what the existing regulations are for health and safety guidance for the building regulations. So our expectation is that if this proposal goes forward, that guidance would be taken into account. However, it is also our opinion that charge points should not be installed in enclosed spaces like in your personal garage or in a closed car park. So just due to exacerbated fire safety challenges in these spaces. But that OZEV guidance is very useful in looking at what the risks could be and how to assess that, and then how to put forward a proposal using that guidance. So it is very helpful. So as you'll see, we've got questions there for what those exemptions are, and that links through all the different areas of this document. Going down, there is a cost cap in GB for this. As you can imagine, this is not necessarily going the cheap option. Building work rarely is, but if you look at what England has done, is they have applied a 3,600 cost cap. We are looking at that to see is that appropriate for Northern Ireland. The Scotland one is £2,000. We're very aware that the way that GB assesses the connection charges is very, very different here. in Northern Ireland. So if you are involved in that side of the work, it would be very, very helpful if you would make a comment on that and come back to us on whether you feel that that limitation is appropriate, if that amount is appropriate, or if that's way low or way high. Going on then, buildings containing more or dwellings undergoing major renovation. So the EPBD and building regulations lay out what major renovation is, and that's very clear. So it's not just going to be some minor work on a building. Well, therefore you have to put in charge points or ducting. It really needs to be quite a wide renovation that's happening on that building. It also is looking at whether or not the car park is being renovated. So those limitations are offering some areas where there would be an exemption. Going forward there, again, buildings containing one or more dwellings undergoing major renovation. So it's really when also the electric supply can cope. What is the electric supply availability? So you're not looking at, well, the requirement proposes to we should be putting in 10 charge points, but our electricity supply only can put in 3. We're not expecting everything to be completely changed. What we're proposing is that those requirements would be limited to what the supply currently is. And also then the next limitation goes down, and depending on what the cost is and the overall total cost of a major renovation. You'll see that's set at 7%. Again, just like with the other cost cap, we are looking at that to see, is that appropriate as costs change and as availability changes. There are the 2 questions there, so please do come back. I'll just say that with every slide. Please come back on the consultation document. It is really helpful when especially when you're in the industry and you're looking at these things day to day. Your views and your knowledge, especially when you're linked in with other jurisdictions, is very beneficial for us. So I would appreciate if you would come back on that. Material change of use, which creates a new dwelling. This is going either direction, whether or not it's a non-domestic building that's putting in a dwelling, or the other way around. But the proposal is that there's a charge point for every newly created dwelling, or one for every parking space, whichever is the lesser. So we are looking at this, understanding that retrofitting can be expensive. So therefore we want this to be practical as well as useful for members of the public who have electric vehicles. Moving on, then material change of use, which creates a dwelling with limitations. Again, you'll see that this is links to what the building's electrical infrastructure is, how extensive the change of use is going to be, whether it affects the car park, whether it's a covered car park, going on with that OZEV guidance, and what the capacity is with the existing electricity supply. So if you went through and checked all these limitations throughout this section of the document, they would be very, very similar. Moving forward for creating a new dwelling, so material change of use there. Those are the questions that link just that area. And then we're moving into section 4D, which is the section that's looking at buildings other than dwellings. Article 8.2 of the EPBD requires provision of a minimum of 1 charge point and ducting infrastructure for at least 1 in every 5 parking spaces. You'll see in the consultation document in both sections, what we have tried to do is lay out a load of different examples as how you could make this work if this was the direction that we went. And if there are further questions or further examples, again, please do come back, because we wanted to make sure that we covered as much of that as possible to clarify what we were proposing there. But one note to highlight here is that the EPBD offers an exemption for SMEs, small medium business enterprises. And while the Republic of Ireland has adopted that exemption, the rest of GB hasn't. So our proposal is that we don't take that exemption, because if you think about tenancy and ownership status, that has nothing to do with building regulations. So we would try to keep what the other GB administrations if that proposal went through. So your views on that would be very greatly appreciated. Just a note on charge points, and to know that, especially if you are a charge point operator, that this will be of interest to you. We're not proposing to change what the current standards are. they have laid out very clearly what the safety recommendations are, whether or not charge points will be smart capable, what the voltage is and all that. So that's just a brief note on that. New non-residential buildings with more than 10 parking spaces. So again, we've tried to lay out examples of this in the consultation document. Minimum of 1 charge point and ducting infrastructure for 1 in every 5 parking spaces. So the example there, if there are 27 spaces, it's 5 parking spaces have access to cable routes and only 1 charge point within that. So it's not looking at putting ridiculous amounts of charge points in, but also being very conscious that with the way things are going after 2035, it's going to be more difficult to find IC cars, and therefore we want to make sure we're providing for people with electric vehicles. Then we've got some proposals for limitations as well. Non-residential spaces, if they don't have 10 associated parking spaces, if it's enclosed, again, you'll see that this is very much mimicking the other section 3E, and where the ducting and the charge points are over the 7% threshold. Again, some further questions similar to the previous ones, please do come back on those. And then mixed use buildings. England's AD outlines the requirements here, and theirs is very, very onerous. So we would just be curious as to see if any of you have had any dealings with that, and if you agree or don't, whether or not that should apply in mixed use building situations, and the level that they have been using. And that is me. So that was a very quick, here's what we're proposing on doing. Please read the examples that we have laid out in the consultation document and come back, formally respond. That would be great. Thanks very much.